Nero Wolfe from the Harvest Street Horror. It was a Monday morning in late October when the dog started acting like something had crawled out of hell and parked itself on our doorstep. And as it turned out, they weren't far wrong. I was coming down the stairs at 8:30, still working the knots out of my neck from a weekend spent watching Saul Panzer beat me at gin rummy, when I heard Caesar's low rumble from the front hall. That's Caesar, 110 pounds of black and tan Doberman, with a bark that could crack plaster, and a sense of territorial authority that would make Genghis Khan look accommodating. When Caesar growls, it's not a suggestion, it's a pronouncement. By the time I reached the ground floor, all 5 Dobermans had assembled in formation near the front door. Caesar at point, Mars flanking him like a storm cloud with teeth, Apollo pacing restlessly, and the 2 females, Minerva and Diana, positioned with the tactical precision of chess pieces. Loyal, our 45-pound brick-red pit bull with the handmade leather collar Fritz had crafted last spring, sat square in the middle like a general surveying his troops. The brass plate on his collar caught the morning light streaming through our bulletproof windows. "Easy," I told them, moving past. Through the reinforced glass panel beside the door, I could see our front stoop. Nothing obvious, but the dogs knew better. I checked the buzzer panel Fritz had upgraded last month. All quiet. The street cameras showed West 35th looking like any other Monday morning, a delivery truck rumbling past, a woman walking a terrier, October leaves skittering along the pavement. Nothing that would explain why 6 dogs were treating our vestibule like a DMZ. Then I saw it. On the 3rd step of our stoop, positioned with deliberate care, was a wooden box, maybe 18 inches square, painted black, with something white chalked on the lid. Even through the bulletproof glass and at that angle, I could make out symbols, not letters exactly, more like glyphs or runes, arranged in a circle around a central mark that looked uncomfortably like a handprint. The dogs had moved closer, pressed against my legs now, their collective attention fixed on that box with an intensity that made my spine prickle. I didn't touch the door. Instead, I went back through the hall, past the coat rack and the mirror, also bulletproof, as were the windows throughout the brownstone, installed after an incident 2 years back that Wolfe still refused to discuss, and headed to the kitchen. Fritz Brenner was at the range, wearing his spotless apron and presiding over what smelled like his incomparable sausages, with rosemary and fennel. He turned as I entered, his face registering my expression immediately. "Archie, something is wrong?" "Maybe. There's a package on the stoop. The dogs don't like it." Fritz's eyebrows performed a small ballet of concern. "Should I?" "Don't open the door, I'll handle it." "Is he up?" "Mr. Wolfe has just gone to the plant rooms." Of course he had. Monday morning, 9 to 11, Nero Wolfe would be 3 flights up in his rooftop kingdom of orchids, communing with Phalaenopsis and Cattleyas while the rest of humanity dealt with its sordid little problems. The routine was sacred. Disturbing it was grounds for justifiable homicide. But the box wasn't going away, and neither were the dogs' concerns. I went to the office, unlocked the drawer where we keep certain items that don't appear on our insurance forms, and pulled out a pair of leather gloves and a long-handled grabber tool Saul had procured from somewhere probably best left unexamined. Then I returned to the front hall. The dogs watched as I disarmed the security system, worked the 3 locks. Fritz's upgrades were thorough, and eased the door open 6 inches. The October air that slipped in carried the usual New York cocktail of diesel fumes, coffee and sidewalk grime, but underneath it was something else, something organic and wrong. Caesar pushed forward. I blocked him with my knee. "No, stay." It's a testament to their training that all 6 obeyed, though Mars released a sound like a diesel engine, idling in neutral. I extended the grabber, hooked the box by its edge, and dragged it closer. Up close, the symbols were clearer. Definitely not English, possibly not any language still spoken. The central handprint was dark red, not paint. Using the tool, I flipped the lid open. The smell hit me first. Decay, sweetness, something chemical. Inside, nestled in black velvet, was a human hand, severed cleanly at the wrist. The flesh was waxy, preserved somehow, the fingers curled slightly as if reaching for something. On the palm, burned or tattooed into the skin, was a symbol identical to the one chalked on the lid. A small card rested beside it, cream-colored stock with elegant script. "For the Montenegrin, Harvest Street remembers." I stood there for maybe 5 seconds, running through my options. Call Kramer? Open that particular can of worms before breakfast? Bring it inside? Possibly contaminate a crime scene? Leave it there? Let every pedestrian on West 35th get an eyeful of our morning delivery? The dogs made the decision for me. Caesar lunged forward, grabbed the box in his jaws, carefully, I noted, like he knew exactly what he was doing, and carried it inside. Mars and Apollo flanked him immediately, forming a moving perimeter. Diana darted ahead to scout. Minerva stayed at my side, and Loyal brought up the rear, his intelligent brown eyes scanning the street behind us. I closed and locked the door, re-engaged the security system, and stood in our vestibule with 6 dogs and a severed hand in a box. It was definitely going to be one of those cases. At 11:02, Nero Wolfe descended from the plant rooms in the elevator, emerged into the hallway, and made his stately progress toward the office, all 1/7 of a ton of him, moving with the dignity of a battleship entering harbor. I was at my desk, positioned so I could monitor both the door and Wolfe's face when he entered. The box sat on my desk, lid closed, looking exactly as sinister as a 1.5-foot cube of black wood could look. The dogs had arranged themselves around the office, Caesar by the door, Mars near the safe, the others distributed with what looked like strategic intent. Loyal was at my feet, occasionally glancing up at me with an expression that clearly said, "This is bad, and you know it." Wolfe entered, saw the box, saw the dog's formation, and stopped. Archie. His voice could have flash-frozen a volcano. "Good morning. Your morning was pleasant, I trust. The phalaenopsis thriving." "What?" he said with terrible precision. "Is that?" "That is a box. Inside the box is a human hand, severed at the wrist, preserved by methods I haven't determined, and decorated with a symbol I don't recognize. It was delivered to our doorstep at approximately 8:30 this morning with a note addressed to you. The note mentions Harvest Street, which for the uninformed is 3 blocks east of here. The dogs detected it first." Wolfe's eyes, barely visible behind his half-closed lids, moved from the box to the dogs to me and back to the box. He walked to his desk. Moved is too mundane a word. Wolfe doesn't walk. He progresses, lowered himself into his custom-made chair, and arranged his bulk with the careful attention of a man settling a grievance with gravity itself. "No," he said. "No what?" "No to whatever this presages. No to the case it implies. No to the disruption it represents. No categorically and emphatically. I'd expected this." Wolfe's enthusiasm for work ranked somewhere between his enthusiasm for travel and his enthusiasm for rain. "You haven't heard the details." "I need no details. Someone has deposited human remains on our doorstep with a cryptic message. This indicates a calculated attempt to involve me in some sordid affair. I decline the invitation." "The invitation might not be optional. The note called you the Montenegrin. That's pointed, personal." His lips tightened. Wolfe was born in Montenegro, raised there until political complications forced his family to leave, and had approximately zero tolerance for anyone weaponizing his origins. The fact that someone had both known and used that information meant they'd done their homework. Then they have issued a challenge they will regret. I am not a carnival attraction to be baited into performance. The hand is real. Whoever removed it from its owner committed at least assault, probably murder. The note says Harvest Street remembers. That's 3 blocks from here. Something happened there, something connected to you, and someone wants to make sure you know about it. I have no connection to Harvest Street. I have barely heard of it. Maybe you do and don't know it. Maybe someone thinks you do. Either way, they've made it our problem. I gestured at the box. This didn't arrive by accident. This is theater. Expensive, premeditated theater designed to get your attention. Fritz appeared at the door, saw Wolfe's expression, and retreated like a man backing away from an unexploded mine. Wolfe closed his eyes. "Remove it, give it to the police, inform them we know nothing, and wish to remain in that blessed state." "Can't do that." "Why not?" "Because Caesar brought it inside. His teeth marks are on the wood. Kramer will have questions, and those questions will lead to more questions, and before you know it, we'll be neck-deep in exactly what you're trying to avoid. Better to control the narrative from the start." It was a weak argument, and we both knew it, but Wolfe was thinking now, which was better than refusing. His fingers drummed once on his desk blotter. The dogs hadn't moved. Caesar's attention remained fixed on the box, like he was personally offended by its contents. "Have you examined it thoroughly?" Wolfe asked. Not thoroughly. I didn't want to contaminate evidence more than the dogs already have. The symbols on the lid describe them. I did, in detail. Wolfe listened with his eyes closed, his lips pushing out and in, the gesture that meant his brain was grinding through possibilities at speeds that would burn out lesser machinery. When I finished, he opened his eyes. The central symbol resembles a sigil from the Balkans, specifically a warding mark used in certain esoteric practices. Rural, pre-Christian, thoroughly discredited. Witchcraft. That word is uselessly broad. These particular markings were associated with protection against revenants, the restless dead, or in some interpretations, with binding such entities to service. He made a face like he'd bitten into a lemon. Superstitious nonsense, of course. Of course, except someone believed in it enough to carve it into a human hand and leave it on our doorstep. Or wished to suggest belief. This is artifice, Archie. Someone is constructing a narrative, using symbols and theatrics to create an impression. The question is, what impression, and for what purpose? That's at least 2 questions. Then we require answers to both. He paused, and I could see him surrendering to the inevitable. Very well. We shall make inquiries. Limited inquiries. If this proves to be some elaborate hoax or attempt at extortion, I shall respond with appropriate vigor. But we investigate. We do not accept clients, and we do not become entangled in whatever dark farce this represents. So we're taking the case. We are conducting preliminary research. There is a distinction. Right, and when Kramer shows up, if Inspector Kramer has questions, he may submit them in writing. Now bring me that card. I wish to examine the paper stock and handwriting. I used gloves to extract the card from the box and delivered it to Wolfe's desk. He produced his magnifying glass and studied it with the concentration he usually reserved for orchid catalogues. Crane's crest. Expensive stock. The script is professional. A calligrapher or someone with formal training. The ink is iron gall, archaic but not rare. The phrasing, Harvest Street remembers, suggests either poetic affectation or genuine emotional weight. Combined with the hand and the sigils, we have a crime carefully staged to evoke specific responses. What responses? Fear, mystification, and most importantly, engagement. Someone wants me involved. The reference to Montenegro, the use of these particular symbols, the delivery method, all calibrated to pierce my defenses. Is it working? His eyes met mine, cold as January. It has succeeded in irritating me profoundly. That will have to suffice. Now have Saul conduct discreet reconnaissance on Harvest Street. I want photographs, interviews with shopkeepers and residents, any unusual activity in the past month, and call Lon Cohen. He has access to the Gazette's archives. There may be historical incidents connected to that location. You want me to go to Harvest Street myself? Not yet. If this is bait, I prefer not to have you snap at it immediately. Saul can move unnoticed. You, regrettably, are more conspicuous. I chose to take that as a compliment. What about the hand? Wolfe grimaced. Place it in the walk-in refrigerator, bottom shelf, in a sealed container. If we must involve the police, I want the evidence preserved. If we solve this ourselves, we can deliver them a complete package. Fritz will love that. Fritz will understand the necessity. And Archie mentioned this to no one else. If someone is attempting to orchestrate events, I prefer they remain uncertain of our response. I nodded and stood. The dogs watched me collect the box, and as I carried it toward the kitchen, they followed in formation. Somsa at my shoulder, Mars and Apollo flanking, Minerva and Diana scouting ahead, Loyal guarding the rear. We looked like a funeral procession for something very small and very disturbing. Fritz was in the kitchen, and his expression when I explained what needed refrigerating was precisely the mix of horror and resignation I'd expected. But he found a metal container with a sealed lid, helped me transfer the contents with clinical efficiency, and placed it on the bottom shelf behind a container of stock bones. "This is connected to Mr. Wolfe's past?" Fritz asked quietly. "Maybe. Someone thinks it is. Then, they have made an error. Mr. Wolfe does not appreciate being reminded of things he has chosen to forget." "No," I agreed, watching the dogs settle around the kitchen like they were establishing a perimeter. "He really doesn't." Saul Panzer arrived at 2 o'clock, looking like he'd just stepped out of a second-hand clothing store, which was intentional. Saul could blend into any environment from a boardroom to a boxing gym, and his current outfit suggested he'd chosen the latter. Worn jacket, scuffed shoes, cap pulled low. The dogs greeted him with recognition, but not relaxation. They knew something was wrong. I briefed him in the front hall while Wolfe took his afternoon nap. Harvest Street, 3 blocks east. We need background, atmosphere, gossip, anything unusual in the past month or even further back. Don't mention Wolfe or the brownstone. You're just asking around. Saul nodded. Looking for anything specific? Disturbed earth, weird symbols, people acting nervous, recent disappearances, old crimes, local legends, anything that connects to this. I showed him photos I'd taken of the symbols on the box lid. He studied them without expression. Saul had seen too much in his years of investigative work to react to much anymore. Balkan? Wolfe says yes. How'd you know? Spent 3 months in Belgrade once, saw similar markings in a village outside the city. Old women painted them on door frames to keep away evil spirits. He looked up. Someone's playing with serious symbolism here. Yeah, well, they played it onto our doorstep. Be careful. If someone's willing to deliver severed hands, they're willing to escalate. Always am. He headed for the door, then paused. The hand. It was fresh? Preserved. Could be days old. Could be weeks. Hard to tell. Saul nodded slowly. So this was planned. Prepared in advance. That's the working theory. After he left, I called Lon Cohen at the Gazette. Lon and I had an arrangement. I fed him occasional tidbits that made good stories, and he fed me information from the paper's extensive morgue. The arrangement suited us both. Archie, he answered, sounding harassed. Make it quick, we're on deadline. Harvest Street. Anything in your archives? Crimes, incidents, scandals, the works. Harvest Street where? Here, Manhattan, between 10th and 11th. A pause. That's what, 3 blocks from you? Give or take. Trouble at home? Potential trouble. Can you look? Give me an hour, but you'll owe me details when this shakes out. Fair enough. I hung up and returned to the office. Wolfe was back at his desk, reading a book about the history of Montenegrin resistance movements, which struck me as pointed. The dogs had settled into their usual positions around the office, though Caesar remained more alert than normal, his ears swiveling at every sound from the street. At 3:15, the doorbell rang. The dogs exploded into action. All 6 surged toward the front hall in a coordinated rush that would have made a SWAT team jealous. I checked the camera feed. Inspector Lionel T. Kramer of Homicide stood on our stoop, looking exactly as pleased to be there as Wolfe would be to see him. It's Kramer, I called back to the office. Pfui, Wolfe didn't look up from his book. Admit him. I opened the door. Kramer stood there in his eternal rumpled suit, his eternal unlighted cigar clamped in his jaw, and his eternal expression of someone who'd just discovered the universe was personally inconveniencing him. Behind him, Sergeant Pearlie Stebbins loomed like a thunderhead. The dogs recognized them both. We'd had enough encounters over the years, and the initial aggression shifted to wary tolerance. Caesar remained at point, but Mars and Apollo backed off slightly. Minerva and Diana watched from the edges. Loyal sat directly in the doorway, immovable as a fire hydrant. Inspector, I said pleasantly, what brings you to our corner of paradise? Can it, Goodwin? We need to talk to Wolfe. He's busy reading about Montenegrin history. Fascinating stuff. Did you know? Now, Goodwin. I stepped aside. The zoo is through there. Mind the animals. Kramer moved past me, Stebbins following. The dogs formed an escort, and I could tell from Kramer's stiff shoulders that having 5 Dobermans and a pit bull shadowing his every step wasn't doing wonders for his mood. In the office, Wolfe glanced up with the expression of a man discovering a wasp in his orchid house. Inspector, how unexpected and unwelcome. To what do I owe this intrusion? Kramer didn't sit. He planted himself in front of Wolfe's desk like a monument to irritation. Got a call this morning. Anonymous tip. Said we'd find something interesting at 918 West 35th Street. So here I am. You want to tell me what I might find interesting? Your definition of interesting and mine rarely align. Perhaps you could be more specific. Human remains. The tipster said there were human remains delivered to your address this morning. Kramer's eyes were hard. So I'll ask again. What's going on, Wolfe? The office was silent except for the ticking of the wall clock. Caesar, positioned near Kramer's left leg, made a sound deep in his chest, not quite a growl, more like editorial commentary. Wolfe set down his book with deliberate care. It appears someone wishes to create complications. Yes, Inspector. This morning a wooden box was placed on our stoop. Said box contained a severed human hand and a cryptic note. Before you launch into accusations, I had no prior knowledge of this delivery, no connection to the victim, and no involvement in whatever crime produced this grotesque artifact. Kramer's cigar shifted from one side of his mouth to the other. Where is it? The kitchen refrigerator, bottom shelf, sealed container. You put evidence in your refrigerator. Would you prefer I left it on the stoop for the local dogs to fight over? Or perhaps I should have called you immediately, inviting hours of disruption and interrogation before breakfast. Yeah, Wolfe, that's exactly what you should have done. This is a homicide investigation. We don't know it's homicide. The hand may have been acquired through legal means, cadaver sales, medical school procurement, any number of... Cut the comedy. Kramer turned to Stebbins. Get the hand. Bag it properly. Call forensics. Stebbins left, accompanied by 3 dogs, who apparently felt official police business required supervision. The remaining 3, Caesar, Apollo and Loyal, stayed in the office, watching Kramer with expressions ranging from suspicion to open hostility. Now, Kramer said, turning back to Wolfe, tell me everything, and I mean everything. Wolfe did, with the selective precision of a man who'd spent decades giving statements to police. He described the discovery, the symbols, the note, and his own complete lack of knowledge about RiddleStreet or any connection to the Balkans that might explain the Montenegrin reference. Kramer listened, his face darkening. So someone dropped a severed hand on your doorstep with a note calling you out by your ethnic origin, and you thought this was something you'd just handle yourself? I thought it was something I would investigate before wasting your time with what might prove to be an elaborate prank. A prank with a human hand. Stranger things have occurred. Not to you, they haven't. Every time something strange occurs within 5 blocks of this brownstone, you're somehow in the middle of it. Kramer pulled out his cigar, looked at it like it had personally offended him, and jammed it back in his mouth. Who else knows about this? Fritz Brenner, Saul Panzer, who is currently conducting inquiries, Archie, the dogs. The dogs, Kramer repeated flatly. They detected the box first. Excellent noses, better instincts than most humans. As if to punctuate this, Caesar moved closer to Kramer and sat, staring up at him with an intensity that suggested he was cataloguing every detail for future reference. Stebbins returned with the sealed container. Got it. Fritz says there's nothing else in there except food. Good. Take it to the lab. Full workup prints, DNA, anything we can use. Kramer turned back to Wolfe. I'm warning you now. Stay out of this. Whatever's going on, it's police business. If someone is targeting me personally, it becomes my business as well. Then let us handle it. Don't go playing detective. I am a licensed private investigator. Playing would imply amateur status. But Wolfe? Inspector, someone delivered a human hand to my doorstep with a message suggesting I have some connection to events on RiddleStreet. Whether I wish it or not, I am involved. I will conduct inquiries. If I discover information relevant to your investigation, I will in due course share it. In due course meaning when it suits you. Meaning when I have sufficient data to present rather than half-formed speculations. The 2 men stared at each other, an old ritual, performed countless times, with neither one ever quite winning. Finally, Kramer turned to leave. I'll want formal statements from everyone in this house, and if you withhold evidence, I'll have you charged. All of you. Your threats are noted and disregarded. Good day, Inspector. After they left, I turned to Wolfe. Well, that went about as well as could be expected. Kramer is a competent officer, hampered by bureaucratic constraints and an unfortunate tendency to suspect me of malfeasance. You do keep solving his cases before he does, because I am unencumbered by his constraints. Wolfe picked up his book again. When Saul returns, I want a full report, and when Lon Cohen calls back, take detailed notes. We now have limited time before Kramer decides to investigate our investigation. What about the anonymous tip? Someone wanted the police here. Indeed, which suggests this is not merely about intimidation or revenge. Someone is orchestrating events, creating a narrative that involves both the police and myself. The question is, to what end? Before I could answer, the phone rang. It was Lon Cohen. Found something, he said without preamble. Harvest Street has history. Bad history. You sitting down? I sat. Go ahead. October 1953. A woman named Rosalind Thorne was found dead in her apartment on Harvest Street. Number 47. Ruled suicide. But there were questions. Neighbors reported hearing arguments, seeing strange visitors, symbols painted on her door. Case closed fast, maybe too fast. What kind of symbols? Paper didn't say specifically, just occult markings. But here's where it gets interesting. 6 months later, her brother-in-law disappeared. Name was Leopold Thorne, vanished completely, never found. Connection? Nothing proven, but the cops looked at him hard for her death. Then he disappeared, and the whole thing went cold. I was writing fast. Anything else? Yeah. There were rumors, nothing printed, but reporters talked that Rosalind was involved in some kind of spiritual group. Seances, spirit calling, that kind of thing. And Leopold supposedly owed money to some very unfriendly people. Recent activity on that street? Nothing that made the paper. But I'll keep looking. You want me to send over what I've got? Please. And Lon, this stays quiet. Always does, until it doesn't. He hung up. I turned to Wolfe and relayed everything. When I finished, Wolfe's eyes were closed and his lips were doing their in-and-out routine again, 72 years ago. But someone remembers, someone who knows I was in New York then, who knows my origins, who has access to obscure historical events. You think this connects to your past? I think, Wolfe said slowly, that someone believes it does. And that is, perhaps more dangerous than if it actually did. Now we wait for Saul, and then, I suspect we will have very difficult decisions to make. The dogs settled around us like they were establishing a defensive perimeter. Outside, October shadows were lengthening across West 35th Street, and somewhere on Harvest Street, 3 blocks east, something very old and very dark was waking up. Saul returned at 6:30, looking like he'd spent the afternoon doing exactly what he'd spent the afternoon doing, asking questions in places where questions weren't welcome. He declined Fritz's offer of coffee, declined my offer of beer, and sat in the red leather chair with the focused exhaustion of a man who'd covered a lot of ground fast. The dogs, who'd been scattered around the office in their usual positions, converged on him. Not aggressively, they knew and trusted Saul, but with intense interest, like they understood he'd been to the source of whatever had disturbed their morning. Caesar sniffed his shoes thoroughly. Diana circled him once. Loyal sat directly at his feet, staring up with those unsettlingly intelligent brown eyes. Wolfe, who'd been pretending to read his book for the past hour, set it aside. Mr. Panzer, your report. Saul pulled out a notebook. Harvest Street runs from 10th to 11th Avenue, 4 blocks long, mostly residential, old brownstones and walk-ups, some converted to multiple units. At the 10th Avenue end, there's a bodega, a dry cleaner, and a shop that sells religious items. Catholic stuff mostly, but also some things that lean more esoteric. How? Candles, herbs, books in languages I couldn't identify. The owner is a woman named Margot Pellegrino, mid-60s, Italian accent. She was nervous when I started asking questions. What questions did you ask? General stuff. How long she'd been there, what the neighborhood was like, any unusual activity recently. She clammed up fast when I mentioned anything strange happening. But she knew something. She knew plenty. I could see it in her eyes. I said I was thinking of renting an apartment on the street. Wanted to know if it was safe. She said, and I quote, "Harvest Street is not for newcomers. The old families they remember. They keep to themselves. You should look elsewhere." Wolfe's eyebrows performed a small exercise in skepticism. The old families remember. Remember what? She wouldn't elaborate, but I got the impression she wasn't talking about neighborhood gossip. This was something deeper, something that went back. I caught Wolfe's eye. 1953. Possibly, Saul said. I talked to some other locals. Older residents were tight-lipped, but I found a superintendent at number 52 who was more talkative, for $20. He said there's been tension on the street for the past month. Anonymous letters slipped under doors, symbols painted on stoops in the middle of the night, people reporting strange sounds. What kind of sounds? Chanting, like a group of people speaking in unison, but no one could locate the source. It would start after midnight, last maybe 10 minutes, then stop. Happened 4 times in the past 3 weeks. The office was quiet except for the grandfather clock ticking in the corner. Caesar had settled beside Wolfe's desk, his head up, ears forward, the position he assumed when something serious was being discussed. Mars and Apollo flanked the door like sentries. Wolfe's fingers drummed on his desk blotter. Number 47. Did you learn anything about that address? Saul nodded slowly. That's where Rosalind Thorne died. Yeah? The super at 52 said, it's been empty for years. The current owner is a man named Bartholomew Radcliffe, lives in Connecticut, inherited the building from his father. He's been trying to sell it, but no one will buy, says the whole place has a reputation. What kind of reputation? Bad luck. The super wouldn't give details, just said people who move in don't stay long. Last tenant moved out in August, lasted 3 weeks. Before that, a couple rented it for a month, then left in the middle of the night without taking their furniture. I'd been taking notes. Did you get inside? No, but I walked past it several times. It's a narrow brownstone, 3 stories, basement entrance. Windows are dark, curtains drawn. There's a gate across the front stoop, iron, old, with markings. Describe them. Saul pulled out his phone and showed us photos. The gate had symbols worked into the ironwork, not obvious at first glance, but there when you looked, circles, crescents, spiraling patterns that might have been decorative or might have been something else. In one photo, you could see the front door behind the gate. Painted on it, faded but still visible, was a mark that looked uncomfortably similar to the one on the severed hand. Wolfe studied the photos in silence. His face, normally so controlled, showed the faintest flicker of something, recognition, concern, and the building's ownership history. Public records say Radcliffe's father bought it in 1960, 7 years after Rosalind Thorne's death. Before that, it was owned by the Thorne family estate, Leopold Thorne. He was the executor. After he disappeared, the property sat in legal limbo for years until his sister Rosalind's other sibling finally got control and sold it. Wolfe leaned back, his chair groaning in protest. Mr. Panzer, did you encounter anyone who seemed particularly interested in your questions? Anyone watching you? Funny you should ask. Saul's expression darkened. At the bodega, while I was talking to the owner, a man came in, mid-40s, expensive coat, well-groomed. He didn't buy anything, just stood there listening. When I left, he followed me for 2 blocks, then disappeared into a building. Description? 6 feet, maybe 190, dark hair graying at the temples, strong jaw, deep-set eyes, carried himself like someone used to giving orders. And he had a ring, heavy silver, looked old, with a stone I couldn't identify. Did he speak? Not to me. But as I was leaving the bodega, I heard him say something to the owner in a language I didn't recognize. Not Spanish, not Italian, something Eastern European. The room temperature seemed to drop. Wolfe's hands, resting on his desk, had curled into fists. Serbo-Croatian, he said quietly. That would be my guess, Saul confirmed. I looked between them. Someone from the Balkans, watching Harvest Street, interested in people asking questions. That's not a coincidence. No, Wolfe agreed. It is not. Mr. Panzer, this man, did he seem concerned by your presence, or merely curious? Hard to say. His expression didn't give much away. But he was definitely interested, and the bodega owner got very nervous after the man spoke to him. Wouldn't answer any more questions. Wolfe sat in silence thinking. The dogs, sensing his mood, had gone still. Even Loyal, usually the most relaxed of the group, sat rigid and alert. Finally, Wolfe stirred. Someone is conducting an operation with multiple components. The severed hand and note were designed to draw my attention and ensure police involvement. The symbols, the references to 1953, the monitoring of Harvest Street, all calculated to create an atmosphere of menace and mystery. But why? Revenge? I suggested. Someone blames you for something that happened 70 years ago. I was in New York in 1953, yes, but I had no connection to Harvest Street, no dealings with anyone named Thorne, and no involvement in occult practices or spiritual groups. Maybe Leopold Thorne had a connection to you. If he did, I was unaware of it. And if someone believes otherwise, they are mistaken. Mistakes don't usually involve severed hands, Saul pointed out. Wolfe grimaced. True, which suggests either someone knows something I do not, or someone is constructing a false narrative for purposes of their own. Either way, we must discover the truth before this escalates further. The phone rang. I answered. Nero Wolfe's. Mr. Goodwin, a woman's voice, low and strained. I need to speak with Mr. Wolfe. It's about Harvest Street. I know what happened. I know why the hand was sent, and I know who's next. The woman wouldn't give her name over the phone. She also wouldn't come to the brownstone. Said she couldn't be seen here, that they were watching, that coming here would mean death. Her words, not mine. After 5 minutes of negotiation, we settled on neutral ground. The public library on 42nd Street. Main reading room, 7:30 that evening. She'd be in the northwest corner, wearing a grey coat, carrying a book with a red cover. Archaic, yes, but the kind of paranoid cloak and dagger routine that suggested she was either genuinely terrified or working very hard to seem that way. Wolfe listened to my summary of the call, with his eyes closed. You will go, naturally. Naturally. You want Saul as backup? Mr. Panzer will watch from a distance. If this is a trap, I prefer you have assistance. And if it's legitimate, then we may finally learn what spectre from 1953 has risen to haunt us. He opened his eyes. Archie, be cautious. Someone has already demonstrated a willingness to engage in grotesque theatrics. They may be willing to escalate to direct violence. Hence the backup. Hence your vigilance. If this woman provides useful information, bring her here if possible. I would prefer to question her directly. She said she can't be seen here. Then convince her otherwise, or extract sufficient information that her presence becomes unnecessary. I looked at the wall clock. 6:40. I'll need to leave in 20 minutes. Then prepare. And Archie, he paused, unusual for him, take Caesar. I blinked. To the library. The dogs have proven reliable indicators of danger. If something is wrong, Caesar will know before you do. It was a good point. Also, taking a 110-pound Doberman on the subway would make an impression. But Wolfe was serious. And when Wolfe got serious about security, I listened. I went to the kitchen and found Fritz preparing dinner. Duck with cherry sauce from the smell. I'm taking Caesar out, I told him. Official business. Fritz nodded without surprise. He'd been with Wolfe long enough that nothing surprised him anymore. His lead is in the hall closet, and there are treats in the pantry if you need to reassure him. I collected Caesar, who seemed both pleased and wary about the expedition. The other dogs watched our departure with the intensity of soldiers seeing a comrade head into enemy territory. Mars actually whined, a sound I'd heard maybe twice in the past year. Saul met us outside. He'd changed into a nondescript dark jacket and was carrying a newspaper. I'll be inside but separate. If something goes wrong, I'll intervene. Appreciated. We took separate routes. I walked with Caesar, drawing looks ranging from admiration to alarm as we covered the blocks to the subway. On the train, people gave us a wide berth. Caesar sat at attention, his head swiveling to track every passenger who came within 10 feet. A teenager with headphones started to reach out to pet him. Caesar's lip curled, showing teeth like white daggers. The teenager reconsidered. The library was its usual cathedral of hushed activity and sleeping homeless people. Caesar and I drew immediate attention from security. I produced my investigator's license and spun a story about a service dog in training. The guard looked skeptical, but didn't press. The main reading room was magnificent as always. Vaulted ceilings, rows of dark wood tables, afternoon light filtering through tall windows. I spotted her immediately. Northwest corner, grey coat, book with a red cover. Mid-30s, dark hair pulled back, nervous eyes that tracked every person who entered. I approached slowly, Caesar at my side. Her eyes went to the dog, widened, then met mine. Mr. Goodwin? That's me. You are? Gretchen Vale. She kept her voice barely above a whisper. I shouldn't be here. If they see me talking to you. Who's they? She shook her head sharply. Not here, too exposed. Then where? She stood abruptly, grabbed her coat, and walked toward the south exit. I followed, Caesar keeping pace. Saul, sitting 3 tables away with his newspaper, caught my eye and gave a slight nod. He was following too. Gretchen led us through the library, down a staircase to the lower level, past the restrooms to a maintenance corridor that probably violated about 6 safety regulations by being accessible to the public. She stopped in an alcove between 2 storage rooms, looked around to make sure we were alone, and finally spoke properly. Rosalind Thorne was my grandmother. That got my attention. Your grandmother. My mother's mother. She died in 1953, months before my mother was born. Officially ruled a suicide. Unofficially, she swallowed hard. She was murdered, and the people who killed her are still out there. After 72 years? Not the same people. Their descendants, their inheritors. She clutched the red book to her chest like a shield. My family has known the truth for decades. My grandmother was involved with a group, a spiritual circle they called it, but it wasn't benign. They were practicing something dark, something that brought in money and power, but required payments. Caesar, sitting beside me, growled softly. Gretchen flinched. He's fine, I said. He just doesn't like threats. What kind of payments? I don't know all the details. My mother was reluctant to talk about it, but Rosalind tried to leave the group. She discovered what they were really doing. Not spiritual enlightenment, but fraud and extortion wrapped in occult theater. She threatened to expose them, and they killed her, made it look like suicide. And Leopold Thorne, her face went hard. My great-uncle, he was part of it. He helped them. When Rosalind died, he kept the secrets, protected the group, but then he got greedy, wanted a bigger share. So they made him disappear. Who's they? The Circle. That's what they called themselves. The Circle of the Harvest. They operated out of that building, 47 Harvest Street, from the late 1940s through the mid-50s. After Leopold disappeared, the Circle supposedly disbanded. But they didn't. They just went underground. I was processing this fast. And they're active now. Yes, someone has reformed them. Or maybe they never really stopped. 3 months ago, I started receiving letters. Anonymous. They said the debts of the past were coming due, that the Circle remembers, that blood calls to blood. Did you contact the police? And tell them what? That I'm being threatened by a secret society from the 1950s that killed my grandmother. They'd laughed me out of the precinct. Her hands were shaking. But then the symbols started appearing. On my door. On my car. The same markings my grandmother wrote about in her diary. You have her diary? Yes, that's why they're after me. It has names, dates, evidence of what the Circle did. And it mentions, she hesitated, it mentions Nero Wolfe. The corridor suddenly felt colder. What does it say? That Wolfe investigated something connected to the Circle in 1953, that he got close to exposing them. But then he stopped, pulled back, and nothing happened. My grandmother didn't know why. She wrote that she'd tried to contact him for help, but he never responded. I kept my voice neutral. And you think this current activity is connected to that? I think someone's trying to finish what started in 1953. The hand, the one delivered to your door, it's a message. It's saying, we remember. We know what almost happened, and now we're coming for everyone involved. Why involve Wolfe at all? Why not just handle their business quietly? Because whoever's running the Circle now wants more than just silence. They want legitimacy, power. They're using the past to create fear, to draw attention, to build a narrative that makes them seem mythic, dangerous, untouchable. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her coat pocket. This arrived yesterday. I took it. The paper was cream-colored, expensive, identical to the card that had come with the severed hand. The message, in the same elegant script: the harvest approaches. The Circle closes. The Montenegrin will bear witness as all debts are paid. First blood has been spilled. More will follow. October 31st, Harvest Street, midnight. Come alone or they die. They, I said. Who's they? I don't know, but I think they have hostages, or they're planning to take some. This is building to something on Halloween, something public and dramatic. Caesar had moved closer to Gretchen, not aggressively but protectively. His instincts, usually impeccable, seemed to have judged her as genuine. That counted for something. You need to come to the brownstone, I said, Talk to Wolfe directly. Bring the diary. Whatever's happening, we need all the information you have. I can't. They're watching me. They'll know. Then they already know you're talking to me. Might as well commit to it. She was wavering. I pressed. Look, someone carved up a body and delivered part of it to our door. That means we're already in this. You coming to us doesn't change anything, except giving us the tools to stop whatever's planned for Halloween. And if they're really watching, they'll see you entered the library but haven't come out. They're probably wondering why right now. That did it. The fear in her eyes shifted slightly toward calculation. If I come with you, will Wolfe protect me? He'll do everything he can, and you'll have 6 dogs between you and anyone who wants to cause trouble. 6. Long story. You'll meet them. I gestured toward the exit. Saul's covering us. We'll take separate routes, meet at the brownstone. You know where it is. Everyone on Harvest Street knows where Nero Wolfe lives. That wasn't ominous at all. We emerged from the library separately. Saul drifted along behind Gretchen, keeping distance but maintaining visual contact. I took Caesar and headed for the subway, watchful for any followers. The evening crowd was thick: October tourists, theater-goers, the usual Manhattan churn. Hard to spot surveillance in that mess. But Caesar knew. 3 times on the walk back to West 35th, he stiffened and looked back, focusing on something in the crowd I couldn't identify. Each time, I adjusted our route, doubling back or cutting through side streets. By the time we reached the brownstone, I was reasonably confident we were clean. Gretchen arrived 10 minutes later, with Saul following at a discreet distance. I let them both in, re-engaged all the locks, and watched as the full pack of dogs converged on our guest. She froze in the vestibule, suddenly faced with 5 Dobermans and a pit bull, all staring at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to judicial assessment. Caesar pushed forward first, sniffed her thoroughly, then surprisingly gave her hand a gentle lick. Permission granted. The others relaxed fractionally. They're protective, she managed. That's one word for it. Come on, Wolfe's waiting. Nero Wolfe listened to Gretchen Vale's story without interruption, his eyes half closed, his fingers interlaced across his middle 7th. I'd positioned her in the red leather chair, comfortable but not too comfortable, and taken my usual place at my desk. The dogs had distributed themselves around the office in what I'd come to think of as their defensive formation. Caesar and Mars flanking Wolfe's desk, Apollo and Diana near the door, Minerva beside the safe, loyal at Gretchen's feet like a furry guardian angel. When she finished, Wolfe remained motionless for a full 30 seconds. Then the diary. May I see it? Gretchen produced a leather-bound journal from her bag, worn and water-stained, its pages yellowed with age. She handed it to Wolfe, like she was surrendering a holy relic. Wolfe opened it carefully, his thick fingers surprisingly delicate with the fragile pages. He read in silence for several minutes while Gretchen sat rigid in her chair, watching him with the intensity of someone whose entire world hung on his reaction. Finally, he looked up. Your grandmother was a meticulous record keeper, and deeply frightened. He turned several pages. She writes here, entry dated March 17th. Tried again to reach NW, sent letter care of his office. No response. Either he doesn't believe me, or he's chosen not to involve himself. I can't blame him. The circle has reach, resources, connections I can only guess at. But I'm running out of options. So you did know her, Gretchen said. No, I never received any letters from a Rosalind Thorne, which means, he looked at me, Archie, in 1953, who handled our correspondence. I thought back. That was before my time with you as a full partner, but you had a temp system then, didn't you? People who'd come in to sort mail when you were busy with other cases? Yes, several individuals, none of whom remained long. It's possible a letter was misfiled, lost, or deliberately intercepted. Or someone in the circle made sure it never reached you, Gretchen said. They had people everywhere, postal workers, shop owners, even a few police officers. Wolfe's expression soured. Corruption is the most reliable constant in human affairs. He returned to the diary. She lists 5 core members of the circle. Their leader was a man calling himself Magister Dante Corvinus, almost certainly a pseudonym. The others Bartholomew Radcliffe Sr., Leopold Thorne himself, a woman named Isadora Cove, and someone identified only as the Silesian. I was taking notes. Radcliffe, that's the name of the current owner of 47 Harvest Street. The son, Yes, which raises questions about his involvement. Wolfe turned more pages. The circle's activities were multi-layered. On the surface, they offered spiritual consultations, seances, readings, typical spiritualist fare. But underneath, they were running an elaborate extortion scheme. They'd identify wealthy individuals seeking supernatural guidance, extract information during spiritual sessions, then use that information for blackmail or to manipulate business dealings. Nice work if you can stomach it, I said. Rosalind Thorne couldn't. She joined because she believed the spiritual aspects were genuine. When she discovered the truth, she became a liability. Wolfe looked at Gretchen. According to this, your grandmother planned to go to the authorities with evidence. She'd compiled documentation, client lists, records of payments, correspondence between circle members. She hid this evidence somewhere secure and planned to retrieve it before making her official statement. But she died before she could. Gretchen finished. Murdered on October 29th, 1953, 2 days before Halloween. Wolfe's tone was grim. Your grandmother wrote that the circle considered Halloween their night of reckoning, when debts were settled, when oaths were renewed, when punishments were meted out. She feared they would move against her during that window. And they did. Yes, which means the current activity, building to October 31st, this year, is deliberately echoing that pattern. Someone is restaging the events of 9. Gretchen's hands were clasped tight in her lap. But why? Everyone involved is dead. Even if the circle continued, the original members would be in their 90s if they were still alive. Children grow up, Wolfe said softly. Loyalty is inherited. Grudges persist across generations. And some people, Miss Vale, believe that power rooted in fear and blood has a momentum of its own. He closed the diary. This evidence your grandmother compiled. Do you know where she hid it? No. My mother searched for years. She thought maybe Leopold destroyed it after Rosalind died. But the diary suggests. Gretchen leaned forward. There's an entry from October 28th, the day before she died. Rosalind wrote, "The proof is secured where only the righteous can retrieve it. The circle will never find it. Even if they tear down walls and dig up stones, it sleeps with the guardian until truth demands its return." Cryptic, I observed. Deliberately so. She knew the diary might be found. She couldn't risk revealing the location. Wolfe's lips pushed out and in, where only the righteous can retrieve it. Pompous phrase, but it suggests a location tied to moral authority, a church perhaps, or a public institution. The guardian might be a person or a symbolic reference. We have 2 days, Gretchen said. If the current circle is planning something for Halloween, and if they're looking for the same evidence Rosalind hid, then they'll be desperate. That's when people get dangerous. They're already dangerous, Wolfe corrected. They've already killed. The question is, how many more deaths are they planning, and can we prevent them? He looked at me. Archie, call Inspector Kramer. Tell him we have new information regarding the severed hand. He won't like being summoned, but he'll come. You sure about bringing Kramer in? Someone delivered human remains to our doorstep. That hand belonged to a person who is either dead or mutilated. The police need to know what we know. He turned back to Gretchen. You will stay here tonight. Fritz will prepare a room. Tomorrow we investigate 47 Harvest Street. I told you I can't. You can, and you will. If the circle is monitoring you, they already know you've come here. Your safety lies not in hiding, but in being so publicly associated with this investigation that harming you would draw too much attention. She didn't look convinced, but she nodded. Caesar, still at her feet, shifted closer, offering protection or perhaps just warmth. I called Kramer. He answered on the 3rd ring, sounding like a man whose day had been comprehensively ruined. This better be good, Goodwin. We have a witness. She's got information about the severed hand and what happened in 1953. Also, we think there might be more violence coming on Halloween. A pause. I'll be there in 20 minutes, and Wolfe better not be playing games. When does he ever play games? He just wins and refuses to explain how. Kramer hung up on me. While we waited, Fritz appeared with coffee and sandwiches. Gretchen ate like someone who hadn't had a meal in days, which might have been accurate. The dogs had settled into a more relaxed posture, though Caesar maintained his position near her chair. Wolfe spent the time rereading sections of the diary, occasionally making notes on his memo pad. I watched him work, recognizing the signs. He was building a mental architecture of the case, fitting pieces together, testing theories. When Kramer arrived with Stebbins in tow, naturally, he looked about as happy as a man discovering his coffee was decaf. The dogs rose as he entered, not hostile but alert. Kramer ignored them with the practiced ease of someone who'd been through this routine before. "All right," he said, dropping into a chair without invitation. "Talk." Wolfe gestured to Gretchen. "Miss Vale, if you would be so kind as to repeat your account for the inspector." She did, with occasional prompts from Wolfe. Kramer listened with his trademark expression of irritated skepticism, but his eyes were sharp. When she finished, he sat back and chewed on his cigar. "So let me get this straight. You think a secret society from the 50s is active again, planning something for Halloween, and they sent Wolfe a severed hand as some kind of invitation?" "Not an invitation," Wolfe corrected. "A provocation. They want me involved because they believe I was involved in 1953 or nearly was. This is psychological theater designed to create an atmosphere of historical inevitability." That's a lot of words for their nuts. "Possibly. But nuts with resources, planning ability, and a willingness to kill. That makes them dangerous regardless of their sanity." Kramer turned to Gretchen. "You got proof of any of this, besides a 70-year-old diary?" She pulled out the anonymous letters she'd received. Kramer examined them, his expression darkening. "These are threats. You should have reported them." "To who?" "The police, who might have officers on the Circle's payroll." "That's a hell of an accusation." "Inspector," Wolfe interjected, "Miss Vale's grandmother documented police corruption in 1953. It's not unreasonable for her to be cautious now." Kramer's jaw worked around his cigar. "Fine. We'll assign protection. Miss Vale, you'll have officers." "She'll stay here," Wolfe said firmly. "Under our protection. If you assign police, the Circle will know immediately." "This isn't a hotel, Wolfe." "No, it's a fortress, with bulletproof windows, advanced security, and 6 highly trained dogs. She's safer here than anywhere your department could provide." They stared at each other, another round in their eternal chess match. Finally, Kramer turned to me. "You okay with this, Goodwin?" "It's not my house, but yeah, I think she's safer here." Kramer stood. "Fine, but I want daily updates. And if anything happens on Halloween..." "You'll be the first to know," Wolfe assured him. "Now about the severed hand. Have your forensics determined anything useful?" "Still processing, but preliminary results say the hand was removed post-mortem, preserved with a chemical mixture we're analyzing, and the tattoo was applied before death, maybe months or years earlier. So the victim had the symbol already. They didn't add it post-mortem." "Looks that way." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Then the victim may have been part of the Circle themselves. The hand is not merely evidence, it's a message to other members. Someone is conducting an internal purge." Kramer looked like he'd bitten into something sour. "You think they're killing their own?" "I think someone is consolidating power by eliminating rivals or dissenters. The hand says, 'This is what happens to those who betray us.' And sending it to me says, 'We know you're watching, and we want you to watch.'" The office fell silent. Even Stebbins, usually just a large presence in the background, looked troubled. "I'll put extra patrols on Harvest Street," Kramer said finally. "And I want that diary copied. It's evidence." "Tomorrow," Wolfe agreed. "Tonight Miss Vale needs rest, and we all need time to plan our next moves." After they left, I showed Gretchen to the spare room on the 3rd floor. Small but comfortable, with its own bath and windows that were, like every other window in the building, reinforced and bulletproof. The dogs followed us up, conducted a thorough inspection of the room, and only then seemed satisfied. Back in the office, I found Wolfe staring at the diary, still open on his desk. "You think we can stop this?" I asked. "I think," Wolfe said slowly, "that someone has gone to enormous trouble to create a theatrical performance. They've built suspense, established stakes, and scheduled a grand finale. But theater requires an audience, and I refuse to play my assigned role. So what do? We change the script. We find Rosalind Thorne's hidden evidence before they do. We identify the current Circle members, and we ensure that October 31st is not a night of reckoning for them, but a night of reckoning against them." His eyes met mine, cold and determined. "Someone has tried to make me a pawn in their drama. Archie, that was a tactical error, because I am nobody's pawn, and I do not lose." Outside, October wind rattled the bulletproof windows. The dogs settled around us like a defensive perimeter. And somewhere in the darkness of Harvest Street, a 72-year-old evil was preparing for its grand return. We had 48 hours to stop it. The next morning, Tuesday, October 29th, broke grey and cold, with rain threatening and the city looking like someone had hung it in dirty laundry. I was at my desk by 7, working on a timeline of events and drinking coffee strong enough to strip paint. The dogs had taken shifts throughout the night, with at least 2 of them always awake and patrolling. Caesar had spent 3 hours outside Gretchen's door, like a guardian statue carved from muscle and vigilance. Wolfe descended from the plant rooms at 11 sharp, surveyed the office, and rang for Fritz. "Breakfast," he announced, "and inform Miss Vale that we convene at noon." "She's already up," I said. "Been in the kitchen with Fritz since 8, helping with prep. Apparently she bakes. Useful skill. How is her emotional state?" "Scared but functional. Better than last night. The dogs seem to have adopted her. They have good instincts." He settled behind his desk. "We visit 47 Harvest Street today. Bartholomew Radcliffe must be located and questioned. If he inherited the building from his father, one of the original Circle members, he knows more than he's admitted." "You think he's involved?" "I think real estate inheritance carries more than legal title. It carries history, secrets, and sometimes obligations. We'll determine which apply to Mr. Radcliffe." Gretchen joined us at noon, looking better. Fritz's cooking and a night's sleep can work miracles. She brought the diary, now wrapped in protective plastic courtesy of Fritz's attention to detail. Wolfe examined her over his breakfast plate, scrambled eggs with herbs, bacon, toast. "Miss Vale, your grandmother's entry about the Guardian and where only the righteous can retrieve it, have you formed any theories?" "My mother thought it might refer to St. Agatha's Church. It's 2 blocks from Harvest Street, and Rosalind attended services there. But the church was renovated in the 70s, and if anything was hidden there, it might have been discovered or destroyed." "Possible, though churches rarely discard items found during renovation without investigation." Wolfe cut his bacon with surgical precision. "Did your grandmother have relationships with clergy?" "Father Mulcahy. She mentions him several times in the diary. He was sympathetic to her situation, though she doesn't specify how much she told him." "Is he still alive?" "No. He died in 1989. But St. Agatha's keeps detailed records. We might find something in their archives." Wolfe nodded. "Archie, after we visit Harvest Street, the church is next. Now regarding our approach to 47, the doorbell rang. Through the security camera, I saw a woman on our stoop, mid-30s, stylish coat, expensive handbag, nervous eyes scanning the street like she expected ambush. "Expecting company?" I asked Wolfe. "No, but admit her. Let's see what fresh complication has arrived." I opened the door. The woman practically rushed inside, relief flooding her face. The dogs materialized from various corners of the brownstone, 6 sets of eyes assessing the newcomer. Caesar took point, his inspection thorough. After a moment, he backed off. Permission granted, but probationary. "Thank God," she breathed. "I wasn't sure if I'd make it here. They'd been following me since yesterday." "They?" I closed and locked the door. "Who specifically?" "I don't know. 2 men in a dark car. Every time I looked, they were there. I finally lost them near Grand Central, doubled back, but..." She was shaking. "I need to speak with Nero Wolfe. My name is Margot Pellegrino. I own a shop on Harvest Street." The woman Saul had interviewed. I led her to the office. Wolfe regarded her with the expression of a man watching his carefully planned day dissolve into chaos. "Mrs. Pellegrino, Archie, a chair. Miss Vale, please remain." I positioned Margot in the red leather chair. Gretchen stayed on the couch, watching with wide eyes. "Now," Wolfe said with forced patience, "why are you here?" Margot gripped her handbag like a life preserver. "Because I lied to your man, the one who came asking questions. I told him I didn't know anything about strange activities on Harvest Street. But I do, and after last night I can't keep silent anymore." "What happened last night?" "Someone broke into my shop, didn't steal anything. Just left a message painted on my back wall in red." She swallowed hard. It said, "Silence brings mercy, speech brings blood." And underneath it, they drew the symbol. "Show me." She pulled out her phone. brought up a photo. The symbol was identical to the one on the severed hand, on the gate at number 47, on all the threatening letters. The red paint, or maybe not paint, had dripped like wounds. "You called the police?" I asked. No, because I know what this means. I know who's behind it." She looked at Wolfe. "My grandmother was Isadora Cove, the name from the diary, one of the original circle members." Wolfe's eyebrows rose fractionally. "I see. Continue." "Isadora was involved with the circle from the beginning. After it disbanded, after Leopold Thorne disappeared, she moved away, changed her name, tried to start fresh, but she kept things, documents, ritual objects, letters. When she died, I inherited everything, including her guilt." "Why guilt?" "Because she knew they murdered Rosalind Thorne. She was there the night it happened, and she did nothing." The office was silent except for the ticking clock. Gretchen had gone very still, her face pale. "Tell us," Wolfe commanded. Margot's voice was steady, but her hands trembled. October 29th, 1953. Rosalind had threatened to expose the circle. Dante Corvinus, the leader, called an emergency meeting at 47 Harvest Street. All members attended. Bartholomew Radcliffe, Leopold Thorne, my grandmother, and someone they called the Silesian. I never learned his real name. Corvinus gave them a choice: eliminate Rosalind or watch the circle burn. Leopold was supposed to do it. She was his sister-in-law. He had access, trust, but he couldn't. He argued, said there were other ways. Corvinus wouldn't hear it. So Radcliffe and the Silesian went to Rosalind's apartment. My grandmother stayed at number 47 with the others, maintaining what they called a binding ritual, supposed to protect them from supernatural retaliation. Hours later, Radcliffe returned and said it was done, made to look like suicide. Papers scattered, a note forged. The evidence Rosalind had compiled was nowhere to be found. Leopold was horrified. He threatened to go to the police. 2 days later, he disappeared. My grandmother always believed Corvinus had him killed, but no one could prove it. The circle disbanded officially, but Corvinus kept control of key members through blackmail and fear. "And now," Wolfe asked, "someone has reformed the circle?" "Dante Corvinus's son. His name is Julian. He's in his 60s, wealthy, connected. He spent decades building legitimacy, real estate development, philanthropy, political donations. But underneath, he's been gathering the children and grandchildren of the original circle, rebuilding it, making it stronger. For what purpose? Power, prestige, and revenge. Julian believes his father was cheated, that the circle should have grown into something massive, a network of influence spanning generations. Instead, it collapsed because of weakness and betrayal. He's obsessed with finishing what his father started. Why now? Because Julian's dying. Cancer. Maybe 6 months left. He wants to cement his legacy, restore the circle to what he believes it should have been. And he wants revenge on anyone connected to its downfall, which includes Rosalind's descendants. She looked at Gretchen. "You, and potentially Nero Wolfe, who he believes interfered." "I did not interfere," Wolfe said coldly. "I was never given the opportunity. He doesn't care about facts, he cares about narrative, and the narrative he's constructed says you're part of the story, so you're part of his finale." I'd been taking notes. The severed hand, whose was it? Margot's face went grey. A man named Harold Clemens. He was Julian's right hand, no pun intended, for 20 years. But last month, Harold tried to leave, said he was done with the circle's games. Julian decided to make an example, to show current members what happens to deserters, and to announce the circle's return. "Jesus," I muttered. "The Halloween gathering," Wolfe said. "What's planned?" "I don't know the details, but Julian has been recruiting aggressively. He has maybe 20 core members now, plus another 50 sympathizers. He's promised them something spectacular, a demonstration of the circle's power, a ritual that will bind them to history, and he's been hinting that there will be sacrifices. Human sacrifices." Gretchen's voice was barely audible. "He uses that language, but I don't know if he means it literally or symbolically. Either way, people will die or be destroyed. Julian doesn't differentiate much." Wolfe's hands had formed fists on his desk. "Why come to me? Why not the police?" "Because Julian has connections everywhere. Police, judges, politicians. He spent 40 years building those bridges. Going to the authorities might expose the circle, but Julian would escape. He always does. But you, she leaned forward, you're outside the system. You solve problems the system can't. And you have a reputation for not being afraid of powerful people. Flattery noted and disregarded. What do you want from me? Stop him. Find evidence that connects Julian to Harold Clemens's murder. Expose the circle completely, publicly, in a way that can't be buried or dismissed. Do it before Halloween, because if Julian completes his ritual, if he establishes the circle as he envisions it, she shook her head. The corruption will be institutional, permanent, and anyone who tries to fight it will end up like Rosalind Thorne. Wolfe sat back, his chair groaning. The dogs, sensing tension, had moved closer, Caesar at his feet, Mars and Apollo near the door, the others watchful. Very well, Wolfe said finally, you will both remain here. The brownstone is secure, and starting now, we are not merely investigating. We are at war with the circle. Archie, call Saul. I want surveillance on Julian Corvinus, his home, his movements, his associates, and call that church. I want to see Father Mulcahy's records this afternoon. We're really doing this? I asked. We have no choice. Someone placed a severed hand on our doorstep and invoked my past. They made this personal. That was a tactical error of monumental proportions. His eyes were cold iron, because I do not forgive such presumption, and I do not lose. He looked at Gretchen and Margot. Tell me everything you know about Julian Corvinus. Every detail, every weakness, every vulnerability. We have 36 hours until Halloween. By then, the circle of the harvest will be broken forever. The dogs gathered closer, forming a protective circle around us all. Outside, rain began to fall, and somewhere in Manhattan, Julian Corvinus was preparing for his grand finale. But so were we. St. Agatha's Church sat on a side street 2 blocks from Harvest, a Gothic revival structure that had somehow survived urban renewal, real estate booms, and the general march of progress that usually turned old New York into glass and steel. Its stone facade was blackened with age and city grime, but the stained glass windows glowed with afternoon light, and the doors stood open. I arrived at 3 o'clock with Gretchen, leaving Margot under the protection of Saul and the dogs at the brownstone. Wolfe had insisted on this division, keeping witnesses separated but secure, preventing the circle from targeting them all at once. Inside, the church was cool and quiet, smelling of incense, old wood, and the particular mustiness of places where time moves slower. A young priest was arranging flowers near the altar. He looked up as we approached, his expression shifting from welcoming to wary when he saw Gretchen's face. I'm Archie Goodwin, I said, showing my investigator's license. This is Gretchen Vale. We're looking into some historical matters related to one of your former parishioners, Rosalind Thorne. We understand Father Mulcahy knew her. The priest's wariness deepened. Father Mulcahy has been dead for over 30 years. We know, but we're hoping to access his records, or any church documents from 1953. May I ask why? Because something that started in 1953 is about to reach a very ugly conclusion in about 30 hours, and we need information that might be buried in your archives. He studied us for a long moment, then nodded. Follow me, but you'll need to speak with Father Benedict. He's our archivist. Father Benedict turned out to be a man in his 70s, with shrewd eyes and ink-stained fingers. His office was a small room off the sacristy, packed floor to ceiling with boxes, ledgers, and filing cabinets that looked like they predated the Spanish-American War. I explained our mission again, in more detail this time. When I mentioned Rosalind Thorne, Father Benedict's expression shifted into something hard to read, recognition mixed with old sadness. I remember that name, he said quietly. Not personally, I wasn't assigned here in 53, but Father Mulcahy spoke of her. He felt he'd failed her somehow. Failed? How? Gretchen asked. She came to him for help, told him she was in danger, that people she'd trusted were planning to hurt her. He advised her to go to the police. She said she couldn't, that the people threatening her had connections, power. Father Mulcahy felt he should have done more, insisted more strongly, and then she died. Did she leave anything with him? Documents? Evidence? Father Benedict nodded slowly. She did. The day before she died, she brought him a sealed envelope, asked him to keep it safe, to give it to the authorities only if something happened to her. Father Mulcahy waited a few days after her death, then went to the police with it. My heart sank. They have it. Had it. The detective who took the envelope was... He trailed off checking a ledger. Detective Arthur Brennan. But according to Father Mulcahy's notes, Brennan dismissed the evidence, said the case was closed. The envelope was never entered into official records. So it disappeared. Not exactly. Father Benedict opened a cabinet and pulled out a wooden box, similar in style to the one that had held the severed hand, but larger. Father Mulcahy made copies first. He didn't trust the police completely. Rosalind's fear of corruption had influenced him, so he photographed every page before turning over the originals. He opened the box. Inside were dozens of photographs, each showing a document, letters, financial records, meeting minutes, a ledger listing names and amounts. Rosalind Thorne's evidence against the circle, preserved in silver gelatin. Gretchen let out a sound between a gasp and a sob. This is it. This is what she died protecting. Father Benedict nodded. Father Mulcahy hid these copies here in the church for decades, waiting for someone to come asking the right questions. He died believing no one ever would, but before he passed, he left detailed notes about what he knew, what Rosalind had told him. Those notes say that if anyone ever came looking for truth about Rosalind Thorne, they should receive these photographs and this. He produced a small notebook, bound in leather, Father Mulcahy's account of his conversations with Rosalind, in his own hand. I took the notebook and photographs carefully. Father, we need to use these to stop something very bad from happening Halloween night. Will the church object? The church wants justice, whatever form that takes. He paused. But I should tell you someone else has been asking about these records. My attention sharpened. When? 2 weeks ago, a man came, said he was researching local history, asked specifically about Father Mulcahy and any documents from the 1950s. I didn't tell him about the photographs. Something about him made me uneasy. He was too smooth, too interested. Describe him. Mid-60s, distinguished looking, expensive suit, had a silver ring with a red stone, and he had this way of speaking, polite but cold, like a snake wearing a diplomat's clothes. Julian Corvinus. He'd been hunting for the same evidence we were. Did you tell him anything? Only that Father Mulcahy's personal effects had been distributed to family, which was true, most of them were. I didn't mention what stayed here. Thank God for that. Father, we need to take these with us. They're evidence in a potential homicide, multiple homicides. Father Benedict hesitated, then nodded. Under 2 conditions. First, you return them when this is over. Second, you ensure justice is actually served this time. Rosalind Thorne deserves that much. You have my word. We left St. Agatha's with a box full of 72-year-old photographs that might finally bring down the circle of the harvest. The afternoon was darkening toward evening, October cold seeping through the streets. Gretchen walked close to me, her eyes scanning every shadow. He knows, she said quietly. Julian knows this evidence exists. He's been looking for it. When he finds out we have it, we'll be ready, and we're not alone. Wolfe, Saul, 6 dogs, and the full weight of evidence, strong enough to bury Corvinus and everyone who works for him. I checked our surroundings, saw nothing obvious, but kept alert. Come on, time to get you back to the brownstone. We took a roundabout route, 3 subway changes, 2 taxis, a deliberate loop through Midtown to make sure we weren't followed. By the time we reached West 35th, full dark had fallen and the rain had intensified. The brownstone's bulletproof windows glowed warm against the cold street. I hustled Gretchen inside, where Caesar and Mars met us at the door, conducting their usual security inspection before allowing us deeper into the house. Wolfe was in the office with Margot and Saul. He'd spread documents across his desk. Margot's inherited files from her grandmother, combined with new information Saul had gathered about Julian Corvinus's current operations. You found it, Wolfe said, seeing the box I carried. It wasn't a question. Father Mulcahy was a suspicious man with good instincts. These are photographs of everything Rosalind compiled. I set the box on his desk, and a notebook with Father Mulcahy's own observations. Wolfe opened the box with surprising delicacy, his thick fingers careful with the aged photographs. For the next hour, he examined them in silence while the rest of us waited. Margot provided context when needed, identifying names and explaining circle procedures. The dogs rotated through the office, maintaining their protective watch. Finally, Wolfe looked up, his expression grim. This is comprehensive, financial records showing money flowing from victims to circle members, letters proving blackmail and extortion, meeting minutes detailing criminal conspiracies. And this, he held up one photograph. A document signed by Dante Corvinus outlining the operational structure of the circle, including bribery of public officials. Is it enough? Gretchen asked. To destroy the original circle? More than enough. To stop Julian Corvinus now? He paused. That depends on what we can prove he's done personally. These documents implicate his father and the others. But Julian wasn't born until 1962. He can't be held accountable for crimes committed before his birth. But he can be held accountable for Harold Clemens, I pointed out. And whatever he's planning for Halloween. Correct. Which means we need evidence linking Julian to current crimes. Mr. Panzer, your report on Julian's activities? Saul consulted his notes. Julian Corvinus lives in a penthouse on Park Avenue. He's chairman of Corvinus Development, a real estate company worth approximately $300 million. He sits on boards of 4 major charities and 3 cultural institutions. He's politically connected, campaign donations to at least 20 elected officials. On paper, he's completely legitimate. On paper, Wolfe repeated, and beneath. I've identified 12 people who meet regularly with Julian at locations away from his office or home. All of them have family connections to the original circle. I've photographed them, pulled background records. 3 have criminal histories, white-collar stuff, never prosecuted. 2 are lawyers. 1 is a judge. A judge, Wolfe said with distaste. Municipal level, but still, if Julian wanted to make legal problems disappear, he'd have help. And Halloween, any indication of his plans? He's rented a warehouse near the waterfront. Officially, it's for a charity event. Masked ball for donors, invitation only. But the timing matches perfectly. October 31st, starting at 11 p.m. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. A public event provides cover. Witnesses who see a party, not a ritual. If violence occurs, it can be staged to look like an accident or isolated incident. So we crash the party, I suggested. We attend, yes, but carefully. We need proof of criminal activity. We need to catch Julian in the act, and we need to ensure no one else dies in the process. He looked around the office. Miss Vale, Mrs. Pellegrino, you've both provided invaluable information, but what comes next will be dangerous. You'll remain here under Saul's protection. Archie and I will attend this charity event. I'm coming with you, Gretchen said firmly. This is my grandmother's fight. I'm not hiding. You most certainly are hiding. If Julian suspects you have Rosalind's evidence, then let him suspect. Let him come after me, in front of witnesses, with police watching. Her voice hardened. I've been running and hiding my whole life, afraid of my grandmother's past. Not anymore. Wolfe studied her. Your courage is noted. Your wisdom is questionable, but I understand the impulse. He turned to me. Archie, call Inspector Kramer. Tell him we have new evidence regarding the 1953 murders and reason to believe further crimes are planned for Halloween. Request police presence at the warehouse event. He'll want to know our source, but then tell him. All of it. We're past the point of selective disclosure. I made the call, Kramer answered, listened, and responded with his usual blend of skepticism and grudging interest. You're telling me a 72-year-old case is about to explode into current homicides? That's exactly what I'm telling you. And we have documentary evidence that'll make your career if you handle it right. Or destroy it if I handle it wrong. I'll be there in an hour, and Wolfe better not be wasting my time. When has he ever? Every 3rd Thursday for the past decade. He hung up. I turned to Wolfe. He's coming, and he's bringing his full skepticism. Good. Skepticism sharpened by evidence is the foundation of successful prosecution. Wolfe closed the box of photographs. We have 24 hours. By this time tomorrow, the circle of the harvest will either be broken forever or expanded beyond our ability to stop it. I prefer the former. The dogs, as if understanding the stakes, had formed their tightest defensive position yet, a literal circle around the office, every angle covered. Caesar sat directly at Wolfe's feet, his eyes on the door. Mars and Apollo flanked the windows. Minerva and Diana covered the hall entrance. And Loyal, smallest but perhaps most determined, positioned himself between Gretchen and the door. Outside, October wind howled and rain hammered the bulletproof windows. Somewhere in Manhattan, Julian Corvinus was preparing his grand finale. But we were preparing ours too, and only one of us would get to finish it. Halloween arrived wrapped in fog and cold, the kind of October night that makes Gothic novels seem reasonable. I was up before dawn, unable to sleep, watching grey light seep through the brownstone's bulletproof windows, while the city stirred awake outside. The past 24 hours had been a tornado of activity. Kramer had come, studied the evidence, and after 45 minutes of hard questioning, agreed that Rosalind Thorne's documents were legitimate and potentially case-breaking. He'd assigned a small team to surveil the warehouse Julian had rented, coordinating with us on timing and approach. He'd also grudgingly agreed to provide backup if things went south, though his exact words were, "when things go south," because with Wolfe they always do. Saul had continued monitoring Julian's movements, reporting that the man was behaving normally. Office visits, business meetings, the outward appearance of someone throwing a legitimate charity event. But Saul had also noted increased security around Julian's penthouse, fresh faces on his protection detail, and a nervous energy in the people meeting with him. Wolfe had spent hours reviewing the evidence, building what he called his chain of inevitability, the logical sequence that would force Julian into confession or self-destruction. He'd been terse, focused, his full intellect engaged in the kind of preparation he usually reserved for orchid competitions. And now it was October 31st. Halloween, the Circle's night of reckoning. I went downstairs at 6:30 to find Fritz already in the kitchen, preparing what he called a warrior's breakfast: steak, eggs, toast, strong coffee. The dogs were scattered around in various states of alertness, though Caesar was fully awake and stationed near the hallway, watching everyone who moved. Gretchen appeared shortly after, looking like she hadn't slept much either. Is this really happening? Are we really going to stop them? That's the plan. Wolfe doesn't usually make plans that fail. Usually, when he does fail, he gets very angry and redoubles his efforts. So really it's better for everyone if he succeeds the first time. She managed a small smile. Wolfe descended from the plant rooms at his usual time, 9 o'clock, punctual as sunrise, and settled into his routine: newspapers, correspondence, breakfast. But I could see the tension in him, the way his fingers drummed occasionally on the desk, the way his eyes went unfocused as he worked through scenarios. At 10 o'clock, Kramer called. The warehouse is under surveillance. We've identified 20 people entering so far, all matching descriptions of individuals connected to Corvinus. Event staff arrived an hour ago with catering, decorations, the works. Looks legit from outside. What about Julian himself? No sign yet. He'll probably arrive fashionably late. Wolfe still planning to attend. With Gretchen Vale, we want Julian to see her. We want him to know we have the evidence. That's the worst tactical decision I've heard this month, and I've heard some doozies. It's also the fastest way to force his hand. Either he moves against us publicly, providing grounds for arrest, or he tries to negotiate, providing grounds for confession, or he has you both killed and walks away clean. That's where your backup comes in. Kramer made a sound like a man with chronic indigestion. I've got 12 officers positioned around the warehouse, plain clothes, armed. If shooting starts, it won't. Julian's too smart for overt violence with police nearby. He'll try something subtle. Nothing about this is subtle, which is precisely why it will work. Julian's expecting fear and capitulation. He's not expecting confrontation. Just don't die, Goodwin. The paperwork would be hell. At 6 p.m., as darkness fell and the city donned its Halloween disguises, we prepared for the evening. Wolfe dressed in his finest suit, made to measure, expensive fabric, the armor of a man going into social combat. I wore my second-best suit and checked my shoulder holster twice, making sure the twined was secure. Gretchen wore a simple black dress and looked terrified but determined. Margot, staying behind with Saul and 4 of the dogs, clasped Gretchen's hands. You're finishing what Rosalind started. She'd be proud. We took 2 cars, Saul driving Wolfe and Gretchen in his sedan, me following in a taxi with Caesar and Loyal. Wolfe had insisted on bringing at least 2 dogs, arguing that their presence would both intimidate and provide early warning of trouble. The taxi driver took one look at the Doberman and Pitbull, started to protest, then saw the cash I was offering and reconsidered his objections. The warehouse was on the west side, near the river, in an industrial area that was gentrifying slowly but hadn't quite arrived yet. Outside, it looked exactly as advertised. Tasteful lighting, valet parking, well-dressed people arriving in expensive cars. A banner announced, Corvinus Foundation Annual Gala. Inside was a different story. The warehouse had been transformed into something out of a fever dream. Black drapes covered the walls. Candles, hundreds of them, provided most of the light, their flames creating shifting shadows. Tables were arranged in a circle around a central space, and at the far end, on a raised platform, stood an altar. Not a Catholic altar, something older, darker, covered with symbols identical to those on the severed hand, the diary, and 47 Harvest Street. Behind it hung a banner, showing a circle with what looked like roots growing downward and branches reaching up, the circle of the harvest in literal form. The guests, about 50 people now, were dressed in formal wear, but many wore masks, Venetian style or more elaborate. Conversation was hushed, expectant. This wasn't a charity gala. This was a gathering of believers waiting for their prophet. We entered, and conversation stopped. Wolfe, 1/7 of a ton of dignified fury, walked directly toward the central space with Gretchen at his side. The dogs flanked us, Caesar on Wolfe's left, Loyal at Gretchen's right. I followed, hand casually near my shoulder holster, eyes scanning for threats. A man stepped forward from the crowd. Mid-60s, distinguished, silver hair, expensive suit, red stone ring on his right hand. Julian Corvinus. He looked at Wolfe with an expression mixing surprise and cold amusement. Mr. Wolfe, how unexpected. And Miss Vale. His eyes tracked to Gretchen. Even more unexpected. I don't recall sending you invitations. We don't require invitations to attend gatherings where murder is on the agenda, Wolfe said, his voice carrying through the warehouse. Conversations died completely. Everyone was watching now. Julian's smile didn't waver. Murder. That's a serious accusation. This is a charity event. This is a ritual gathering of the Circle of the Harvest, an organization responsible for at least 3 murders in 1953 and at least 1 current homicide. You are Julian Corvinus, son of Dante Corvinus, and you have reconstituted your father's criminal enterprise under the guise of philanthropy and spiritual awakening. The warehouse was silent except for the hiss and pop of candles. Julian's smile finally faded. You have no proof. I have comprehensive proof. Wolfe gestured to Gretchen. Miss Vale has provided documentation compiled by her grandmother, Rosalind Thorne, detailing the original Circle's operations. Financial records, correspondence, meeting minutes, and witness testimony that implicates your father and his associates in blackmail, extortion, and murder. Old documents prove nothing about current activities. True, but the hand you severed from Harold Clemens and delivered to my doorstep proves murder. The threatening letters sent to Miss Vale and Mrs. Pellegrino prove conspiracy and intimidation. And this gathering, Wolfe gestured at the altar, the symbols, the masked guests proves continuation of criminal enterprise. Julian's face had gone hard. Around the warehouse, his people were shifting, positioning themselves. I counted at least 6 who moved like they had training. My hand stayed near my holster. You've made a mistake coming here, Wolfe, Julian said quietly. You've brought witnesses into a situation beyond your control. On the contrary, I've brought witnesses to a controlled trap. Inspector Kramer and 12 officers are positioned around this building. Every entrance is monitored. Every person who entered has been photographed and identified. You cannot escape. You cannot cover this up. And you cannot harm anyone here without immediate arrest. Julian's eyes flickered to the exits. For the first time, uncertainty crossed his face. Your father built the Circle on fear and secrecy, Wolfe continued. You've attempted to rebuild it the same way. But times have changed. Evidence cannot be buried as easily. Witnesses cannot be silenced as completely. And I, his voice hardened to iron, will not be intimidated by theatrical displays and threats. Caesar, sensing the tension, moved closer to Wolfe's side and released a low growl that echoed through the warehouse like distant thunder. Several of Julian's people stepped back. You think you've won, Julian said. You think exposing us ends this. But the Circle is larger than you know. We have resources, connections, power in places you can't imagine. Then I suggest you use those connections to hire excellent legal representation, because you will need it. Wolfe turned to me. Archie, inform Inspector Kramer that we're ready for him. I pulled out my phone, already here. The warehouse doors burst open. Kramer entered with 6 uniformed officers, all armed. Behind them, more police flooded in through side entrances. The warehouse was suddenly full of law enforcement. Julian Corvinus, Kramer announced, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, extortion, and about 12 other charges I'm going to enjoy listing. Everyone else in this warehouse, don't move. We're sorting out who's complicit and who's just stupid. Julian stood frozen, his face a mask of rage. Then he lunged, not for the exits, but for the altar. His hand grabbed something hidden behind it, a knife, ornate and ancient-looking. Caesar exploded into motion. Before Julian could take 2 steps, the Doberman was on him, jaws clamping onto Julian's wrist with surgical precision. Julian screamed. The knife clattered to the floor. Officers swarmed him. Kramer walked over to where Wolfe stood, absolutely still, watching the chaos resolve into order. That went about as smoothly as I expected. Meaning poorly but successfully? Something like that. Kramer looked at the altar, the symbols, the terrified guests being separated and questioned. This is going to be a nightmare to prosecute. You have documentary evidence going back 72 years. You have current crimes. You have witnesses willing to testify. And you have Harold Clemens's DNA on that knife Julian just grabbed. Wolfe gestured toward the altar. You also have whatever Julian was planning to do with that blade tonight. I suspect forensics will find it interesting. Kramer grimaced. You enjoy this, don't you? Making my job harder. I enjoy justice being served. If that complicates your job, I can only apologize insincerely. They stared at each other, and something passed between them. Not quite friendship, but mutual professional respect, earned over years of these exact encounters. I'll need formal statements from all of you, Kramer said finally. Tomorrow, my office. Of course. Kramer turned to leave, then paused. That dog of yours just saved Corvinus from doing something astronomically stupid. I'm almost disappointed. Caesar, released from his target, returned to Wolfe's side and sat, looking immensely pleased with himself. Loyal, who'd maintained position at Gretchen's side throughout, gave what sounded remarkably like a satisfied snort. We left the warehouse as police processed the scene. Outside, fog had thickened, but the cold air felt clean after the candle smoke and tension inside. Gretchen stood on the sidewalk, shaking slightly. It's really over. The immediate danger is over, Wolfe said. Julian Corvinus will be prosecuted. The circle is exposed, but the work of dismantling networks like this takes time. But Rosalind's evidence, it'll finally be used? It will be central to the prosecution. Your grandmother's courage and foresight have achieved justice 7 decades delayed. Gretchen wiped her eyes. Thank you for everything. Thank yourself. You provided the information we needed. You risked yourself to stop something terrible. That requires strength most people never demonstrate. We returned to the brownstone, through Halloween dark streets, past costumed children and carved pumpkins, and the ordinary celebrations of people who had no idea what had almost happened tonight. The brownstone's windows glowed warm and safe. Inside, Fritz had dinner waiting. Margot and Saul were celebrating quietly with champagne. The dogs, all 6 of them, conducted their security inspection, determined we were all accounted for and safe, and finally relaxed. Caesar positioned himself at Wolfe's feet. Mars and Apollo settled near the door. Minerva claimed her spot by the safe. Diana curled up under the desk, and Loyal, having proven himself formidable despite his smaller size, claimed the center of the rug like he owned it. Wolfe settled into his chair with a sigh that seemed to release all the day's tension. Fritz, beer. Archie, your notes on tonight's events. Miss Vale, Mrs. Pellegrino, you're welcome to stay as long as needed. I pulled out my notebook and began reconstructing the evening, while Wolfe drank beer and listened. Outside, Halloween continued. Inside, the brownstone was secure, the case was solved, and 6 dogs kept watch over all of us. It was, all things considered, a good night's work. The days following Halloween were a bureaucratic hurricane. Kramer and his team descended on the brownstone repeatedly, taking statements, reviewing evidence, and generally turning our normally ordered existence into controlled chaos. The dogs tolerated this with varying levels of grace. Caesar maintained his dignity. Mars looked perpetually annoyed. Apollo paced constantly. Minerva observed everything with judicial assessment. Diana darted around like she was herding bureaucrats, and Loyal planted himself at the office entrance like a small, muscular sentry. Julian Corvinus, unsurprisingly, lawyered up immediately. 3 attorneys, each costing more per hour than most people's monthly rent. But the evidence against him was comprehensive. Rosalind Thorne's documents, Father Mulcahy's photographs, Margot Pellegrino's testimony, forensic evidence from Harold Clemens's murder, and the theatrical mess at the warehouse. The Circle's exposure made headlines. The Gazette ran a front-page series. Lon Cohen's byline, prominent, detailing the 72-year conspiracy, the murders, and the modern resurrection. 12 additional arrests followed, as other Circle members were identified and charged. Gretchen stayed at the brownstone for a week before finding an apartment in Brooklyn. Margot returned to her shop on Harvest Street, though she reported that the street itself felt different now. Lighter, somehow, like a curse had lifted. She'd started painting over the symbols, reclaiming the space. Bartholomew Radcliffe Jr., the current owner of 47 Harvest Street, turned out to be genuinely ignorant of his father's involvement in the Circle. When confronted with the evidence, he'd been horrified and immediately offered the building to the city for historical preservation as a cautionary memorial. It was a Wednesday afternoon, 2 weeks after Halloween, when Wolfe and I finally had the office to ourselves. The dogs had settled into their usual positions, the paperwork had been filed, the statements signed. Autumn sunlight angled through the bulletproof windows, warming the leather chairs. Wolfe was reading. I was processing the final invoices. Julian Corvinus's estate would be paying our fees courtesy of a court order. The number was satisfying. Archie, Wolfe said without looking up from his book. Yeah? The letter Rosalind Thorne sent me in 1953. The one that never arrived. What about it? I've been thinking about who might have intercepted it. About who had access to our mail at that time. I waited. Wolfe thinking was usually followed by Wolfe concluding something uncomfortable. There was a young man who helped with correspondence that spring. Temporary hire, recommended by someone whose name I can no longer recall. He worked here perhaps 3 weeks, then disappeared. I thought nothing of it at the time. You think he was working for the Circle? I think someone ensured that Rosalind Thorne's plea for help never reached me. And that person was likely positioned specifically for that purpose. He finally looked up. Someone knew she would try to contact me. Someone knew I might investigate if given the opportunity. And someone prevented that contact. Dante Corvinus. Almost certainly. Which means, he paused, which means he viewed me as a threat even then, before I had any knowledge of the Circle's existence. Why? That, Wolfe said with rare uncertainty. I don't know, but it troubles me. There are pieces of this puzzle still missing. Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. Through the security camera, I saw a woman in her 70s, well-dressed, carrying a small package. I opened the door. The dogs, as always, conducted their inspection. Caesar's assessment, harmless but interesting. The others concurred. I'm looking for Mr. Nero Wolfe, she said. My name is Elaine Thorne. I'm Rosalind's sister, Leopold's other sibling. I showed her to the office. Wolfe rose slightly, as much as he ever did for guests, and gestured to a chair. Mrs. Thorne, your family has been much on my mind. And yours on mine. She set the package on his desk. After the news broke about the Circle, about my niece Gretchen and the evidence, I realized I had something that might interest you. It's been in my possession since 1953, hidden away because I was afraid of what it meant. But now, she pushed the package toward him. Now I think you should see it. Wolfe opened the package carefully. Inside was a leather folder, aged but preserved. He opened it. His expression changed, subtle, but I'd known him long enough to recognize shock. Inside the folder were photographs and letters. Letters addressed to various New York detective agencies, dated 1952 and early 19... One was addressed to Wolfe. Rosalind didn't just contact you, Elaine said quietly. She researched you. She knew about cases you'd solved, knew your reputation. She believed you were the only person who could help her, because you weren't connected to New York's social networks, weren't vulnerable to the kind of pressure the Circle could apply. She was thorough, Wolfe murmured, reading. She was terrified. And smart. She compiled information on you, your background, your methods, even your origins. She thought if she could convince you that you and she shared something, both being outsiders, both understanding what it meant to fight entrenched power, you might help. Wolfe continued reading. When he finally looked up, his eyes were harder than I'd seen them in months. Mrs. Thorne, your sister wrote here that she believed Dante Corvinus had connections to political movements in the Balkans in the 1940s. Specifically, she mentions Montenegro. She writes that Corvinus claimed to have eliminated certain obstacles to nationalist movements. Did she elaborate on this? Not to me directly. But I know she was frightened by something Corvinus said to her. Something about understanding how to deal with displaced persons who thought they could rebuild elsewhere. She took it as a threat, specific to you. The office was very quiet. Even the dogs sensed something significant. Dante Corvinus knew who I was before I knew the circle existed, Wolfe said slowly. He researched me as thoroughly as Rosalind did, and he prevented her from reaching me because he recognized me as a potential threat to his operation. He looked at Elaine. Your sister was right to be afraid, and I failed her by being unavailable when she needed help. You didn't fail her. You never received her message. The failure was the corruption that prevented that message from reaching you. A distinction without practical difference. No, Elaine leaned forward. A distinction that matters, because you've now done what she hoped you'd do 72 years ago. You've destroyed the circle. You've brought justice for her and for Leopold and for all the others. It's late, but it's real. Wolfe sat back, his hands folded across his middle. Thank you for bringing this. It clarifies certain matters. After Elaine left, I turned to Wolfe. You okay? Pfui. I dislike mysteries that implicate my past in ways I never suspected. Dante Corvinus targeted me specifically because of who I was and where I came from. That suggests connections and knowledge I find deeply unsettling. But he's dead. Julian's going to prison. The circle's broken. Yes, but I wonder how many other circles exist, operating in shadows, identifying potential threats and neutralizing them before those threats even know they're in conflict. He opened his eyes. It's a disturbing thought. So we stay vigilant. We solve cases. We protect people. Same as always. Same as always, he agreed, though perhaps with more attention to our mail. I had to laugh at that. The afternoon faded into evening. Fritz brought dinner. Roast duck with cherry sauce, one of Wolfe's favorites. The dogs settled around us. Outside, November had arrived, bringing earlier darkness and colder winds, but inside the brownstone was warm and secure. Later, after dinner, after Wolfe had retreated to his book and I'd finished my paperwork, I found myself thinking about Rosalind Thorne, about a woman who'd tried to reach across decades for help, who'd compiled evidence knowing she probably wouldn't live to see it used, who'd hoped that someone, anyone, would care enough to finish what she started. She'd found that someone in Gretchen, her granddaughter, who'd had the courage to step out of hiding and fight. And she'd found it, eventually, in Wolfe. 72 years late, but real. Justice delayed, maybe, but justice served. I looked around the office at Wolfe reading, at the dogs keeping watch, at the bulletproof windows reflecting the New York night, at the space that had become a fortress for people who had nowhere else to turn. Good night, Rosalind, I said quietly to the air. We got them for you. All of them. Caesar lifted his head, looked at me with those intelligent brown eyes, and I swear nodded. Maybe he understood, or maybe I was just tired and seeing things. Either way, it felt like the right ending to the Harvest Street horror. The case was closed, the evidence was filed, the victims were avenged. And tomorrow, Wolfe would return to his orchids. I'd return to my routine, and the brownstone would stand solid and secure on West 35th Street, ready for whatever came next. Because something always came next. That was the job. And we were damn good at it.